Custodians of Crafts by subject matter. We're in the thick of it. This is episode number 5. And in this episode, we begin our journey in Tunisia. What does it mean to return to a place, not just physically, but emotionally and through textiles? I sit down with Lamia and Alia, co-founders of Fouta Harissa, a women-led textile studio that reimagines the traditional Tunisian Fouta through revival of Tunisian weaving and slow production. Their work spans continents and contradictions. It is a brand rooted in Tunisia, created in Diaspora, and shaped by the intimate relationship a person has with their country and their global experiences. Lamia, with a background in cultural programming and research, and Alia, whose work bridges diplomacy, impact, and storytelling, came together in friendship but also in purpose to create Fouta Harissa. So we talk about complexities of building something in Tunisia today, about what it feels to leave and choose to come back. We talk about politics of production, the poetics of design, and the soft but powerful decision to go slow. Speaking about women and friendships, this episode is sponsored by Book of Rebel Asians by Suki Dosanjh Lens. Book of Rebel Asians is a platform, a voice, a movement, and soon-to-be published book. It is on a mission to amplify bold, nuanced stories from the South Asian diaspora and beyond, with an intent to honor those before us and to inspire the generations after us. It's a space for those who challenge norms, reclaim sacred histories, and speak truth with integrity. It's a community where being too much is exactly enough. So if you've ever felt like you don't fit in, you belong at the Book of Rebel Asians. I'll be linking their social media credentials in the description so you can stay updated with their work. Come find us on YouTube, Spotify. We're also on Substack, and let us know what stayed with you from this episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do let us know what you feel about this episode and hope you enjoy it. Alia, Lamia, welcome to Custodians of Crafts. So stoked to have you both here finally. Shout out to Sarah, who's the founder of Kea Olive Oil, who's been the matchmaker in this case. So where are you guys joining from, both of you?
I'm joining from New York City.
And I'm joining from São Paulo, Brazil.
So we have lots of grounds to cover. Let's get started. I want to start with your personal story. Alia, Lamia, both of you come from very diverse professional backgrounds within each other, but also, as compared to what you do today. So Alia, you worked in social impact in Miami and you've worked with Microsoft in the Middle East. Lamia, you've managed festivals and community spaces in Brazil, and as well as worked in research in Tunisia and Nigeria. So can you share a little bit more about what drew you to Tunisian textiles and how did Fouta Harissa come to life?
Sure. I'm happy to start. It's so nice to be here. Thank you. So I was born and raised in Manhattan in New York City. My father's Tunisian, my mother's American. So I've always grown up kind of one foot in both worlds, very different worlds. And I think that informed my professional career in more ways than I realized until I was a bit older. I think from a very young age, it was very clear to me that there are a lot of people in this world that have a lot, as we see every day in New York City. And then I would go to Tunisia, where my dad is from a very small town, and see how little many people had. And I think it sparked a curiosity for me to understand on a global perspective why that is the case. And it drove me to study international development and economics in university. And then I remember in college when all of my friends were finding their path towards international development and what that meant to them, whether it was through humanitarian aid or health or education or women's rights or civic engagement. And I didn't quite know through what lens I wanted to have this agency on the world. And one of my professors said the word social entrepreneurship to me, and it was like a cloud lifted, because I had always been very interested in business and the technology and innovation and the creativity behind it, but it didn't match with my values and my way of wanting to be an equalizer and wanting to invest in communities that didn't have as much as the kind of flashy entrepreneurial world that we saw in the States. So when I learned that there was an intersection between the two, I think that's what has really driven my career, whether it's working with nonprofits that support these social entrepreneurs around the world, like Ashoka or Endeavor, to working with Microsoft, where I was more of the like corporate social responsibility lead in Tunisia after the revolution. And using business as a mechanism for social good, I think, is what has always intrigued me and driven me to find new ways of building that intersection. And I think that it definitely contributed to why Fouta Harissa is the way it is and why we're trying to build this company in that light.
Yeah, I have a bit of a different background than Alia, even though we're both of Tunisian fathers and American mothers. So I grew up in Tunis. I was born in Tunis. My parents are still in Tunisia, and I grew up, I think, just a very unshakably Tunisian. I don't know if that, and so anywhere I went, be it to see my mom's family in the US or, anywhere to travel, I think because my dad is so Tunisian and everything he does and has always been so, so proud of being Tunisian and never considered even living somewhere else besides Tunisia, even though he was married to an American where they met in Tunisia, and always wanted to show Tunisia to anywhere he went. So whether he traveled and would take some oranges and tuna, or, we would go and buy something artisanally made to give to people that, be it family or friends. And I think those trips to the stores before each trip showed me from the early ages how many beautiful things Tunisians make. And until today, I think that's still very marking. And I think that maybe subconsciously now I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly where that moment was, but I always thought it was so beautiful and so cool that it was handmade in Tunisia. And I was hoping somewhere that I would work with that one day. But no one talks that's not necessarily a career you talk about becoming, right? When you're younger in Tunis, is of working. I didn't know anyone around me necessarily who worked in craftsmanship. I just know that we valued it. And eventually, Fouta Harissa started in Brazil, but way before even I was moved to Brazil to start the company. I have a memory. I was just telling Alia that the first time I came to Brazil, I was 23. It was also around the same time I met Alia in Tunis in 2011. And I was working for a consultancy company that focused on sustainability for private sector. And it took me to Brazil for the first time, into the Amazon. And I was so excited to be there. I didn't necessarily know that I was going on a 6-hour or more boat ride throughout the night. And I was like, oh, I'm in the Amazon. It's so hot, but I was freezing on this boat ride overnight. And what saved me was a futa, actually, because it was the only blankety, towely type thing I had. And then I spent 10 days sleeping in hammocks and being covered with a futa. And, fast forward a few years, we're in Brazil, take out the futa on the beach in Rio. And someone's like, oh my gosh, what is this? We have to have one. And there wasn't something like a futa. So I think lots of clicks throughout life kind of happened to then bring the moment of calling Alia and say, I think I really want to do a futa company of hand-woven things in Tunisia to export to the world. Are you in? And she was. And so here we are.
That's a great story. And yeah, lots of dots connecting. So you worked in, social entrepreneurship of a big corporate, and then you work in consulting where you're using all these, similar impact oriented frameworks. I think we're going to talk a lot about those histories, but I want to talk a little bit more about the history of Tunisia because I think now Tunisia has so much diaspora, especially in France where I live, and they're all like there is a lot more visibility and understanding of Tunisian culture. The diaspora is making a mark on a global, global level, but specifically in Europe, very visible. But when you two met in 2011, it's a pivotal moment in the history of Maghreb, led by Tunisia's Arab Spring movement. There is a change in political life, then that leads to change in cultural life. Over the next couple of years, we see that there is experimentation with democracy, but that leads to economic strain, this exodus of Tunisians leaving the country. So there is a lot of migration. And then there's, I think, like big turmoil, exodus of diaspora, there is a lot of like clinging to roots, cultural reckoning. So a lot has happened in the decade and a half. How would you describe it as just seeing it connected to the country, and if you have any personal stories that you would like to share.
It's so many layers to that question. I love it. So I can speak personally that growing up in the States, I did not feel a strong diaspora here. I spent pretty much my whole life trying to explain to people where Tunisia is. I got very good at my little geography lesson, especially in the States, where I would say Tunisia and they would say Indonesia, or they would say Tanzania, and I was like, no. And then I would say, do you know where Egypt is? And most Americans know where Egypt is because in history class we study ancient Egypt and the hieroglyphics and the pharaohs and the pyramids. So I would say, do you know where Egypt is? And they would say yes. And I would say, do you know where Morocco is? Because a lot of Americans are more familiar with Morocco. And I would sort of say, we're in the middle, even though there's obviously Algeria and Libya as well in there, but I wouldn't even go there to confuse. And then I would get kind of interesting reactions from people of like, oh, you're African, you don't look African. And it's just, so I think growing up, this sort of the mixed identity and trying to explain to people where Tunisia was, which I think it was why it was so marking for me and for many other Tunisians who were living in the diaspora when the revolution happened. Because all of a sudden, your tiny country that nobody's ever heard of is splashed on the cover of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and on BBC. And I think it did spark for me a moment of pride and connection to Tunisia that as an American kid, I hadn't necessarily been super attached to, besides my cultural connection. I have a big family in Tunisia and we would spend summers there, and I spoke the language with my father growing up. So it wasn't like I was completely disconnected at any point, but this definitely sparked something for me, a desire to go back, a desire to contribute, a desire to be part of this story, of this new chapter that Tunisia was writing. And I really didn't know what role I could play. But I remember very well that I was in the last year of my master's program at NYU, and I was studying international business with a focus on the role of the private sector in development. And I was writing a thesis on the role of the private sector in contributing or not to peacefulness and stability. So the parallels of kind of what I was interested in doing around business and what was happening in Tunisia and my cultural connection and my desire to be there. I mean, I got on a plane in June 2011, right after I graduated. I had no job lined up. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but there was just this very tangible draw, like pulling me to go to Tunisia. And I didn't know anybody in Tunis. I mean, my dad's family is from the southeastern coast, about 3.5 hours outside of Tunis. I had one uncle who lived in the capital. I crashed on his couch and I just sort of tried to figure it out from there. And I really thought that I was going to stay for 2 or 3 months, but ended up staying for 5 years. And one of the things that not only drew me in, but kept me was there was just this palpable excitement after the revolution. I mean, especially for somebody like me who didn't grow up there, right? But there was an opening. There was a sense of opportunity. There was, I think, this kind of fear, this curtain of fear that dropped around starting something new. I mean, I've always said that nothing kills innovation like dictatorship. And I feel like as the dictatorship fell, the entrepreneurial class, the young people, the students, the people who have always maybe dreamt of starting a business but wouldn't dare because of the climate, all of a sudden they were able to. And so I became very involved in the startup ecosystem on the tech side, especially. But for me, it wasn't about the tech. It was about being in this kind of entrepreneurial revolution moment that I felt when I got there.
That's amazing. I just can't imagine just picking up and leaving, and also relate to the fact that how it might probably feel like the nucleus of the world at that time. Lamia, what about
everyone thought I was crazy. I mean, my family was like, everybody is fleeing and you're coming. Why are you coming? Don't come, stay away. And I was like, no, I want to be there.
I had just come back to Tunis after 4 years in the US, where I did finish my undergrad. But then I went back to Tunis. I think I was working for a women's rights NGO at the time, right after college, and before going on to the consulting company, and it's right around the time, obviously, we met Alia, right when she got to Tunis, I think. I was moving to Nigeria, but I was still kind of back and forth between Tunis and Nigeria. And it was absolutely exciting time in Tunisia. And, my whole life I'd known one dictator. And so it, to all of a sudden at 23, we were part of the protests and we were part of all of that. So it was just such an exciting and surreal time to be there. And it was very clear that my brother was also there. It was very clear that like we didn't want to be anywhere else. And that this was just so historic with all of the fear that the unknown brings. And, a lot of the things we feared are happening today. But also so many of the people who were involved then, I think for us, it was like that early 20s idealism with everything happening, and then put that together. I mean, it just felt like, it was the world. What a precious thing to live at some point in your life. And I think that we're trying still to take that energy with us in everything we do. And maybe sometimes because, Alia and I met at that time, it does feel like that energy really continues in Fouta Harissa. And so much of what we wanted to do back then through our different community groups and youth involvement and impact projects and however many essays we wrote about education, environment, and energy. We try to take that with us still. And so even though obviously around us in Tunisia, there's a lot of scary and politically messy and all of these things are happening, it is part of change. And at the same time, there's, of course, really exciting things happening. So from the entrepreneurship scene that really grew then, I mean, there is startup acts and, there are some intensive entrepreneurs. There are young people who know that they can do it. Tunisia's biggest forte is probably tech today. So there's lots of tech startups. So all of this is happening. And it's, Tunisians, whether they're staying in Tunisia or outside, have a lot more tools at their disposal than maybe they did have, 15 years ago. And so the world is more open, with that. Then there's the frustrations of the people who can't take advantage of all of those things. So all of these complexities sit together in Tunisia. And I think, nothing can happen overnight to become, especially if you're you're colonized and then you're under dictatorship for so many years, and then there's no way it's just going to be like, utopian democracy, like that's just
of course
not going to happen. But I think that some days are better, some days are worse, but there's so much happening in Tunisia still. And I think I think at that time there was a lot of entrepreneurship happening, and then what we saw is the next step further, so much the creative scene is booming. I think the creative scene is always somehow booming, but under dictatorship, you have to be creative outside of your country, probably, so you can say what you want to say. And I think today, through so much global influence, but also people looking back into their own roots and ancestors, there is a new sense of creativity. So whether people are starting their own brands or, they think being an artist or a photographer or a video maker is actually a possibility and not just a hobby. So we're seeing so much of that. And through Fouta Harissa, we have it gives us an excuse to meet so many of creatives and meet so many people of different age groups that are, whether they're in Tunisia or whether they're Tunisian diaspora outside. I have to admit, we're not too connected to Europe because we're more Americas focused. We're trying to create our own diaspora.
Do it.
But I think there is so much happening that is the fruit of that time. And then each phase, I think, gives room for a new kind of development that maybe we haven't even imagined yet. So we're holding on.
Yeah.
We're holding on to that. Yeah. And
Yeah,
hopefully
that's
part
beautiful.
of some change. Yeah.
I mean, as an outsider, that's how I imagine. Like, there is tons of possibilities, there's tons of chaos, but you're in the center of this like energy field. So you basically take a lot out of it. And it's also a very young country, right?
Like most Arab countries, the youth is the biggest population. What there is a high unemployment rate amongst youth. And that is the one statistic that is extremely worrying. And so hopefully it is very worrying, but also it is a country, it's like you should be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, that there isn't too much outside. There isn't too many options of what a viable career is. But I do think that's changing a bit through entrepreneurship, through a more recognized creative scene, through the artisanal sector regrowing, right? So if we can contribute to these things, or, people continue to work in different sectors, then, and if each one can give job opportunities and purpose opportunities to young people, then I think we're doing something right. Thinking that there's maybe opportunities outside, but as we know today, everywhere is a little bit challenging.
Oh yeah, we're sitting on the backdrop of a global, I think, pivot moment. It's not even recession at this point. I think we're
No, I think,
pivoting
yeah, I think
into.
we're in the thick of it. Yeah, probably. Yes.
Thank you for that. Actually, that was very clear, very exciting time. But coming back to textiles at that point, right? So you're both in Tunisia in 2011, and of course you meet. You kind of like start working towards the idea, and then you launch it in 2018. Is that it?
Well, when we first met, we worked on other things. We were part of a group called Global Shapers, which was
Right.
the 20-something group of the World Economic Forum. And at that time, because there was so many revolutionary movements happening and so much excitement amongst youth, there were Global Shaper hubs all over the world. And there was the first one in Tunis that we were a part of, as well as a few other friends that today continue to do incredible work in Tunisia and outside. But Alia and I always worked really well together, and I think just had very solid, similar values and a
Yeah.
vision of Tunisia within the world. And I think
Yeah.
also just an interest in both travel, design, and sustainability within business. And then we saw through our, next career choices, that we continue to go on this line. And I mean, you have many friends, but it's not everyone you would start a business with. Right. And so I don't know why it was very clear for us. I know it was very clear for me from it was like, if I start a business, I think it would be with Alia. I think we're just very complimentary and admire each other, respect each other. So I think all of these things. So it was natural afterwards, of who that would be if we wanted to start a business together. And co-partnering to start a business is a lot less lonely than doing it by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that because of that initial foundation of our friendship and realizing that we had shared values and we were, I was working in social entrepreneurship and corporate responsibility, and she was doing sustainability and working with nonprofits. And I think we had a strong foundation from Tunisia. So it was really interesting when Lamia moved to Brazil, I moved to Miami, where I continued to work with social impact businesses. I work with a social impact accelerator. And, of course, I'm living in Miami. I bring my futas to the beach everywhere I go. And Lamia moves to Brazil and brings her futas to the beach everywhere she goes. That I think it was just a really kind of interesting realization that Lamia was in Brazil and was like, wait, there isn't a textile like this in Brazil, in such a beach culture country. And it's something both Lemmy and I grew up with, that the futa to the beach they were inseparable. So from childhood. So that getting a phone call from Lemia in Miami being like, I think there's something here. I think we need to test this out. So it was kind of many years after we met, but I think that throughout, we obviously stayed very, very close, even when we lived in different places. And I think the seeds were being planted along the way.
Yeah. And I think it was very clear for both of us. We wanted to be involved in social impact business somehow, but it was clear we wanted to stay connected to Tunisia and have a contribution in Tunisia somehow. So how were we going to do that? So even the futa, like we could have just bought really cheap futas, brought them back to sell them, which we started this way. It was more of like, oh, let's just make some, cash on the side. But then it was like, no, if we're actually going to start a business, this needs to have real impact in Tunisia. This has to be a Tunisian story that we're proud to tell. And we wanted to be able to go back to Tunis and not just be there for 10 days of vacation, where you can't even leave your grandma's house during, like, that's such a short amount of time. So, like, how can we be in Tunisia and kind of maintain a parallel life of still being extremely connected and active within our communities? And I think that was the biggest requirement of having this business. How can we be in the world, be in these countries we chose to be in, but at the same time maintain a very strong connection to Tunisia and on a much deeper level than, just going back and forth. And I think this, as challenging it is today, it does hit all of those.
Yeah. You've been able to achieve those objectives for sure. So,
yeah, it's a little messy, but it's happening.
So with the Fouta, you're reviving a piece of living history. There is obviously this textile. I mean, those of us who did not grow there would not be able to appreciate how much layered history this piece of textile has. It's evolved from a hammam towel to a household staple. And today, much like Fouta Harissa, your brand, I think it's a design object which is now has global relevance. And of course, it's utilitarian as well. But I want to understand in general, like when I was researching, I saw that across the continent, there are, in Africa, there are versions of textile, each unique in its own way, different styles. Like we have the Ethiopian shemma, the Tanzanian kanga, the Ghanaian kente, again, very popular, I guess, and the Algerian axilal, which has very similar kind of cultural context. Do you think that there is historically or in use in culture, there's a context that binds these different kind of styles and textiles together?
I think so. I think that at the base, craftsmanship or craftswomanship, artisanally made things are very high designed things in the sense that they're practical objects that you need for your day-to-day life. And I think that's why so many countries have a similar thing, because I have yarn and I can weave it into something practical. I think the most precious thing about artisan made things is that it's like I can make a practical thing. Rugs, they started not making collections of, hundreds of rugs. Each family wove their rug and then they used that, or, they would finish the rug and give it to the son when they got married. So it's just originally one of a kind, but it's also originally extremely practical. And so I think it makes so much sense that all of these African countries, whether they're going to use it as a skirt or to hold your baby or, to dry with it, It's like I need a piece of cloth that, fills all of these requirements. And sometimes we're like, it doesn't really make sense for us to sell a futa in another African countries because they have it already and they're already weaving it. Or Tunisia does, the futa is unique to Tunisia. It's like the shalal of Algeria is unique. It's more of a hayek. It's equivalent to another piece of textile that's in Tunisia made of wool. It fascinates us, this research, because it contributes a lot to how we think of the futa and how else can we think about it? How else can it be used? How can we introduce it to this other context? And that's why this thing of being in Brazil is so interesting, because it allows us to see some of Tunisia, or like view Tunisia and its artisanal objects with new eyes, which is really exciting. So something I was always so passionate about in Tunisia, I'm even more now, even though I grew up with it and it's part of my history. But I'm happier now when all of the Brazilian friends are like, no, this is my futa, right? Like a word they've never heard of before. And so proud to take the futa that is from Tunisia to lay it on the beach or take it on the hiking trip or cover their baby with it. Through Fouta Harissa, if we can create these new cultural links, thanks to weaving and artisan-made things, I think maybe that's another future of artisanship.
I just want to understand what kind of yarn are you using? Because I see you use a lot of silk. So it's very luxurious yarn for a beach towel.
So the silk is a very new addition. And we are very intentional of calling the silk our silk scarves, because they are silk scarves. They are part of the Fouta Harissa brand, but they are not a futa. And so the futas are traditionally made with natural fibers, predominantly cotton, but we've also loved working with linen, which I think is a little bit more unusual. I mean, it has been done before. Cotton and linen have been primarily what we use to make futas. In Tunisia, there is a large textile manufacturing industry where different brands have their factories and they import tons and tons of cotton yarn or linen yarn in different colors, depending on the trend of the day. There's leftovers, and those are kind of dumped into a secondary market to be picked up or disposed of. So the ultimate design and sustainability challenge for Fouta Harissa from the beginning has been, how do we design like limited collections of futas based on the linen and cotton yarn that we can find? So not contributing to new production of yarn, not importing new raw materials into the country, but really just working with what we can find in Tunisia and seeking the highest quality. I mean, we've learned a lot about which yarns serve best for futas through a lot of experimentation. So really seeking those out. I mean, the number of pictures I have of Lamia climbing mountains of bags of spools of yarn in different towns in Tunisia, just like hunting for the right shade of teal or the right red. It's a very hands-on process. It's not like we get like a magazine with like a color code of yarns and we choose with Pantones. We're like digging in the warehouses to find the right yarn. So that's our futas are traditionally made with those. The silk has been a new and exciting development, and I think it comes from what happens when you have to innovate based on different supply chain challenges. It's gotten harder in Tunisia to find the quality of cotton yarn that we desire and that is in the right quantities and the right weights. And we met this incredible artisan in downtown Tunis in the Medina who, is running a third generation hand looming workshop. And we just knew we wanted to work with him. So I think this is one of those examples of when we first met him, we were like, do you work with cotton or linen? Can you make us futas? And he was like, no, I work exclusively with silk. We're like, okay. We've never worked with silk before, but we want to work with you, and his quality is impeccable. And so really we took a risk and decided to make, this is now our second collection of silk scarves, and it's just been a whole new side of the business that we're exploring and really enjoying as well.
Yeah, I think we always wanted to work with different hand woven things, no matter what they were, because in Tunis, we're not working with any local fibers. That's only if we go into the straw. So then, like baskets and rugs like that, I think would be local. And before there was a lot of wool to do the rugs, but today even some of the wool is imported when we can't tell how good of a quality it is or not. So in general, there has been a long road to a diminishing of the quality of yarns. So that's a lot of our work to eventually get to the highest quality futa or rug or scarf. It's just a lot of research and development that doesn't happen overnight. So hopefully one day we'll find some other solutions. And it's also what made us look into what it might look like to make a futa in a country that we can, from planting the seed of the cotton to the final product, which is a luxury we don't have in Tunisia. So part of our research has led us to what would it look like to make a Tunisian futa somewhere else where they do grow the fiber. Keep you posted on that.
Silk scarves, futa, different things because of the yarn. Okay, super clear. So this really goes very well into the next question because it's about the language of fashion, right? This is a lot to do with social media culture, fast fashion, lots of factors come into play. But I keep seeing this, and South Asians are mad right now on the internet. And I wanted to get your perspective on this because of the language. So Zara has, which is these dhoti pants typically worn in the summer under your kurtas, like long shirts. And they were being sold as billowy pants with some SKU code. Similarly, their designs called cords, which is essentially very similar to the South Asian kurta pajamas. There's a lot of conversation around, first of all, appropriation, but also I just feel like there's so much homogenization in fashion. Everything looks the same because all the hashtag OOTDs and everything looks like very similar. The styles become homogenous. Of course, appropriations become easier because there is no legal framework in place, specifically if you're stealing from a different culture or you're copying without knowing, whatever it is, and we're seeing in language, there's a anglicizing of language. So everything is what it would be in English. So when in your work, like, of course, there's so many interesting weaves. There are weave structures which are, like tabby and supplementary weft. So how important is it for you to preserve the language, and how do you do it in your practice as you release a product which is an export, but it's very global product, and your customer base is very global? So how do you preserve that?
Well, one, I think it's really important to call things by their name and what they are. And I think, we're learning so many different languages left and right. And as you said, there's English, that gets, everything is design, even if you're speaking a different language. For us, it's really important wherever we can. It's part of the reason why Fouta is in our name. So Fouta Harissa, even though we started it for fun, because Fouta or blusa is a name of like an outfit that in Tunisia you might get married in. So it's like a crop top, very Indian influenced actually, like big like poof pants, all adorned with jewels and sequins and everything in the top. So that's a Fouta with blusa. But then even if it has nothing to do with the actual Fouta with tassels that we're talking about. And then there's Fouta and there's harissa, which is the most quintessentially Tunisian thing, which is a pepper paste made out of Tunisian peppers. And also one of our proudest exports, though many call it Moroccan or Israeli, which is not true. So the Fouta harissa was our way to kind of be very in your face with how Tunisian we are, because they're both such singularly Tunisian things. So that already helps us. It's even if, some people have, they call it falta, fruta, whatever it is, but eventually they get it right. And I think that's important. Like we want people to get it right, because look, you already learned like a word in another language. And I think once you name that, then you can move on. And I think we have to respect it. What you're saying about the weaves is actually interesting. We don't even give them their Tunisian names, because I think in English technical textile design education, there is twill and herring, but there's very technical names for all of the weaves, and you can see them in the textbook. When we're working in the atelier, we learn it's like this one is called the tail of a mouse, and then this one is called the eye of the chick, right? So like it's informal, and we try to, in our descriptions of all of the weaves, we try to give what they're called in Tunisian as opposed to also what they're called in English, because it's also fun and it gives you context, and you're like, oh, it makes sense that it's called the eye of the bird, because that's exactly what it looks like. So I think in the language, it's really important to preserve it. And at the same time, I think it's where you can have it's where creativity can grow, and where we can have a lot of fun with language. A conversation between Alia and I, we will mix a lot of English and Tunisian. And I feel like it makes our lives a little bit more dynamic. And it's something that we really want to get across in a lot of our communications as well, because it's how Tunisians speak. You're mixing a bunch of things, maintaining yours, maybe losing a little bit. So I think maintaining the dynamism around it is what's most natural to us, and what we hope we can get across in all of our communications, while still definitely, just being Tunisian. I think when you have people who are not from the place that they're like working with, then I think the language becomes a little more complicated.
And I'll just add that, growing this business in the US, it's really interesting how when you say the word Fouta in Tunisia, there's just like an automatic understanding of the textile. It conjures an image. You've owned one forever. You know what it is. You also have this like innate understanding of how versatile it is. You don't have to explain it in Tunisia. And then it's been so interesting, especially in the States, kind of how you have to put it into buckets for the customer. Like, they're always is it a towel? I mean, it's one of the first questions I get. Is it a towel? Is it a scarf? Is it a blanket? And we've had to sort of practice, clarifying for an English speaking audience based on their vocabulary, right? Fouta isn't in their vocabulary as a textile. A scarf is, a towel is, a blanket is, a shawl is, right? There are these other words that represent certain uses of a textile. And I mean, we know that a Fouta can be used for all of those things and more. And so it's this interesting balance of trying to communicate how the word Fouta innately is so versatile and can do all of these things. But, when you're running a brand and you have to kind of break it down. And so when we, are talking about a different Fouta with a different weight or a texture, we can say this is more of a blanket, or if it's more of a beach towel, or if it's more of a shawl or a scarf, and kind of put it into these product buckets almost, in order to make it a little bit more accessible to an audience that doesn't have the vocabulary to know and innately understand what a Fouta is.
I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but it's such a great name. And I think, like, one, your shoots are beautiful, they're like pristine, but you immediately can build a recall that this is a beach product for someone who's completely uninitiated. That's the beach product. The Fouta Harissa, like, I'm imagining, I don't know, myself and like the Mahdia eating a lablebi by the beach. It's just immediate connection. It's a very, very smart name. I really like it. So one thing I want to talk about is the business aspect. It's a social impact oriented business, and futas now are definitely a symbol of something which is sustainable and artisanal. And you're doing the same thing. You're powering the futures of the artisans in Tunisia. But how are you measuring your success? I've seen, like, speaking to entrepreneurs, that it's not typically the same metrics that any other business uses, because there's a lot of complexity and layered elements, and we spoke a lot about those things. So what is it that you look as success as you're building your business?
You took the words out of my mouth around how when you're running an artisan-based business that cares about environmental sustainability, that cares about ethical labor practices, it's so much more complex than the types of KPIs or metrics that we learn about in business school, right? Or certain revenue markers. When you're working with something that is so human-centered and so deeply rooted in craft and skill and talent. So it's been a journey for us. I mean, I think it's kind of ever evolving. We knew that obviously revenue is a goal because that allows for sustainability of the business to continue and to continue to place orders with artisans. I think that is something that is a driving measure of success for us, is that we've seen firsthand over the last 5 years that artisans will weave as long as there is demand. So how can we continue to be a consistent source of that demand for them, even if it's not in massive quantities, which in artisanship doesn't make sense anyway. So in that mindset, of course, we want to generate revenue to be sustainable in order to continue to place orders. But we knew from when we started that becoming profitable was going to be a longer road, because when you're prioritizing, when you're not cutting corners in terms of how much you're paying people to make your products, when you're honoring the artisan, the labor, the time, the effort, and then also when you're not willing to cut corners in terms of raw materials either. We don't work with any synthetics. We don't work with any mixed fibers. We're always trying to look for like pure 100% natural fibers. That's more expensive. And so I think it's just been us constantly readjusting what our measures of success are. But I know, for me, it's been refreshing to sort of look for those markers of success off of QuickBooks or off of your spreadsheets. And it's, when an artisan finishes a piece with a design that we created and has like an enormous look of pride in their face, like that to me is success. It's like when a customer who's never heard of a futa before comes back to us and is like, oh my God, this is the one thing in my life that I didn't even know I needed and now I use for everything. It's when we get to work with young creatives and photographers and designers and kind of become a platform for other younger Tunisian talent as well. It's seeing the weaving sector continue to survive. I think that is definitely a goal of ours, is how can we be one part of the reason that artisans who weave continue to have work in the long term.
A lot of our purpose, and now we call it this, but I didn't know what to call it before, is this like role of soft diplomacy. So I do think that we take our role of, my aunt always used to joke since I was little that I was an unofficial ambassador of Tunisia, because I was always so proud to talk about Tunisia, even when I was little, and I was always obsessed with Harissa. And I think, and that spirit continues today. And so I think through Fouta Harissa, we get to be unofficial ambassadors in our circles, obviously, of Tunisia. And so, to have everyone around us ask us for jars of Harissa and to like wait impatiently for the next Fouta that's going to come, and so that they can add to their collection and call it a Fouta and not a kanga or something else. I think all of these, those are moments of pride for us. And, sometimes we think, okay, we've been around for 6 years, 7 years. And, depending on who you ask, that could be a long time or a little time. But like within those 6 years, I'm proud how many people know where Tunisia is now and know what a futa is now and ask, to eat harissa. And I feel like imagine how much more we can do in the next 6 years. And then the next 6 years after that. If everyone in Brazil or everyone in the US maybe, knows where Tunisia is and where Harissa is from, I feel like we will have done so much, and like bringing a whole new type of demand to Tunisian artisans who, in addition to being proud of making something that looks a little different, is also really proud that their work is going to Brazil.
Yeah.
To their favorite football team's town. So I think all of those things hopefully will translate into big numbers on our spreadsheets, but those are very real, I think, for us, real markers of success, I think, of what the brand is trying to do. And of course, Tunisians, like the Tunisians wanting to know about our brand, and the Tunisians wanting to buy our futas or wanting one of our t-shirts that says Fouta Harissa and Harissa is better than ketchup. I think that's really cool. Like all of those messages, every single email or message we get telling us that or you inviting us to this podcast, honestly, it's a big marker of success, I think, for us.
Yeah, and it's true. Harissa is better than ketchup, and I love ketchup. So I put Harissa on everything. I still have to find a brand which is not on the BDS list in the grocery store. So, but I get the tube ones, which you find in any one of the
the classic
epiceries. Yeah.
Well, hopefully Sarah with Kaya will bring a new amazing Harissa to Paris soon. Yes,
for sure.
Yes.
So through the process of entrepreneurship, I want to know, and this is for each one of you, what philosophies guide you when the work feels tough, when, traditional systems are hard to change? Working with artisans can be challenging as well, because again, they are precursors of traditional systems. They're doing something, and they're also masters of their craft, and coming as an outsider and trying to get them to deliver something can be challenging. But in general, when you hit those walls, what philosophies have guided you in the past?
So for me, I see the way that we're trying to build this business as breaking out of the mold of traditional capitalism. I studied business, and I've for the long time been in this world of, margins and scale and growth. And I think that as I've gotten older, and also as we've grown this business, I'm just realizing how the traditional models of capitalism that prioritize unfettered growth at all costs is like deeply contrary to the type of business that we're trying to build, and has led us to the moment of the world that we're living right now, with the climate crisis, with insane income inequality, and some people still working on slave labor wages while other people are billionaires. I mean, I think we're seeing the direct impacts of what has happened since the 80s, when we decided that capitalism and free markets is the only way to go. So I think Fouta Harissa, in its own small way, is part of a movement of businesses that are trying to break out of this mold. I think movements of ethical capitalism, our environmental capitalism are really inspiring to me right now. The slow fashion movement, there's a sort of a recognition that luxury doesn't just mean name brands, but luxury can also be the story of the weaver, the sourcing of the materials, the meaning, the cultural meaning behind it. So I think that for me, is what keeps me grounded when things are hard, and I'm like, by traditional capitalistic markers, we would be considered irrelevant. And realizing that so much of our relevance derives from all the things we mentioned a second ago, right? About our markers for success aren't just about the size of our margins or all of these acronyms, your customer acquisition costs and your cash flow and your burn through rate and all these things. I think that what grounds me is realizing that even though it's hard, we're trying to be part of a movement that can define success in new ways and grow businesses in ways that are slower, more sustainable, and more with like a deeper sense of pride and cultural relevance and storytelling behind it.
Yeah, I think the main philosophy is slow. I think that's what reminds me of it. I think being an artisan business is being a human-centered business. Things do depend on the artisan to make it. And he might call you and say, I need to go to a funeral. I'm not going to finish these things this afternoon. And that's real, and that's life, and that's human, and that's okay. Because I need to launch some collection tomorrow doesn't mean that that's more important than their work and their life that allows them to be an artisan. And I think that is extremely humbling And that is always the reminder of it's okay, your numbers are not growing as fast as someone else who's making something in China and doesn't even know what it looks like. Like that's not even comparable. And so I think the slowness of the process of making, and it's not just weaving, right? Like, I mean, this is maybe for another podcast, but like the artisans that we work with is not just the weaver, it's like the 5 other artisans that also have a unique skill in setting up that loom and then setting up the warp in just this way, and then weaving and then doing the tassels. So like the chain of artisans is much larger than just the one weaver that we see usually. And each of those people have lives and each of them have a process, and all of that needs to be taken into consideration when we make our planning. And we take pride on that, because how wonderful to be connected to so many people, and what you buy ends up contributing to all of these things. And I think sometimes, we'll put pressure on ourselves. It's not out fast enough. This isn't. And then one day, like, whose collection schedule did we just want to follow or make up? Like to go on our rhythm. Obviously, you want to keep momentum building and keep things going and stay busy. But just to always remember this thing of slow. And we have the rich privilege of being in an artisan business. And so that process, we always need to remind ourselves that we can put that process in the way we run the business as well. And that those two things need to speak to each other. And so it doesn't make sense to be making things handmade, natural fibers, all of these things, and then come to the business side and then just try to do as if, you need it round 1, 2, 3, investor, blah, 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 all of that. Like, how can we have this business side thrive, but really stay true to the process of the rest of our business, which is at the base of everything we do. And that's always really helpful. Yeah. And then also, just success can come. What does success look like in the future? We would love to have a business that goes for a really long time, that if we have children, we can pass them on to if they want, right? Like we kind of see that. And then to just be part of that Tunisian culture for a really long time. It's being very aligned. This was something that Alia and I were always extremely in agreement on, and what helps us look at each other every day and say, all right, we can do this. We got this.
I can totally see a futa being passed down also as a product through generations, because something which is made by hand and with so much care. It's interesting, when I was in my undergrad, this is way back 2007, Zara's just-in-time model was this revolutionary supply chain idea, which is essentially Zara produces new designs every fortnight and is able to ship, minimum quantities. And so it was this amazing thing to study, and cut to now, I'm not saying world has drastically changed, but there is a certain global reckoning. Handmade is luxurious, something which has been made by somebody, laboriously on the loom, or it could be the last generation which ever does it, and you might not even see it, if this person is not passing down their skill to the next generation. So I feel like the beginning of this reckoning is quite exciting for me, I think. And again, I'm sure you have it in your families. I have hand-me-downs from my mother, which she bought from some artisan, like a shawl, and it's been used 100 times, and it's been dry cleaned 100 times, and it still is really good because it was made with really good products. I think that hopefully will become a big movement, but I definitely do see a futa being hand-me-down by generations. I think it's definitely something we'll see more and more of.
For sure. Yeah. I think everything we make, we want it to be an heirloom, whether it's the futa or silk scarf or a rug one day. Those things that you have in your home and you're just so proud that it's there, and you look at it with affection, and then you're proud to tell your friend where it's from. I think that is more people consuming in that way, I think, is what will change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're in the last bit where I have this rapid fire questions. What's your favorite futa design to date? And you can tell me, and I can put up a picture of it so that people can see what it is.
So I was thinking about this, and the first one that came to mind was this futa that we made as part of our Oasis collection. So by the way, we name all of our collections, and we have a lot of fun doing it, coming up with a theme and a story behind it. And then we name each futa in the collection. So this one was called Amir Mirage. And it was when this kind of signature design of ours was born, which is these lines that are kind of a gradient. They go from thicker to thinner and then back to thick and thin. I will never forget when we first told our artisan about this. He was like, "You want me to make that?" Very complex, thin, like, differentiating in centimeters. So for me, it's the Amir Mirage from our Oasis collection.
I think mine, this is a simple design. I don't have favorites. I love all of the futas we've ever created, and I think we've created over like 100. But it's bakloti, which is a futa, a very textured futa with a slub yarn, a slub linen, and it's in the harissa red, and we called it bakloti, which is the pepper that makes the harissa. So it's one of our classics. And then coming up after is going to be a bakloti extra hot, which is a red on red.
So nice. I love the red, the gradients of reds that you guys do. It's beautiful. One word in Tunisian Arabic that captures Fouta Harissa's mission.
We thought about this one, and we together would say mharhara. So mharhara means spicy. And you can say it, obviously you can say har, so something is spicy, the food, and then you can say mharhara, it has a spiciness to it. And so we like to think that Fouta Harissa obviously has a lot of spice. I think we personally need a lot of spice to deal with a lot of the situations we have to deal with, and it's a fun word to say, mharhara.
It's great. Dream artist or designer you'd love to collaborate it. Let's put it out in the universe. Which one or one?
There's so many. And I think we're gonna mention, I could say brands because they have the designers in them. I think in Tunisia, our dream person would be, she is a mentor, but she's still a dream person to collaborate with, is Laurence Tuitou, who has La Liste Tunisienne. Hopefully, one day we can do something. Love Nor Black Nor White. I think that Indian, I think they make artisan handmade things look so cool, and their branding and their story is just so impeccable. So we keep dreaming, who knows, one day we could do something. And I'll do one more from South Africa, Wanda Le Photo. So this brand, again, the designers are just really creative. And I think also that thing of showing your culture, I think in a way that is cool and different and takes it away from that Western gaze. It's like, what do we think about who we are and how do we show that to the world? So I'll stop it at those, but I think those three would definitely be dreamy.
What are you reading or listening to or watching right now? Any kind of content consumption, I'd love to know.
There's content consumption in this world. So I've been listening to our latest Fouta Harissa playlist. We have a Spotify account. We release playlists for each of our collections. The most recent one that came out with our silk scarf collection is called Wild Heart, and I have just had it on repeat. And so listening to that, also listening to some podcasts. I love this podcast it's from Emergence Magazine. They really are drawing threads between spiritual, cultural, and environmental ecology. So it's very based in the planet and the role of humans in the planet. Sometimes when I feel overwhelmed, it feels good to zoom out and remember how small we are in the context of the history of this planet. And sometimes Emergence Magazine's podcast does that for me. And then also Business of Fashion. I feel like it just kind of keeps me up to speed on what's going on in our world, in our sector. And then reading, I read a lot of fiction, mostly novels. And I'm reading Chimamanda Adichie's newest novel right now, Dream Count.
I also saw your Mother's Day playlist. It had some bangers from the 70s.
Yeah, it was super fun to make.
Yeah,
I would say the Fouta Harissa playlist for sure. Custodians of Craft. I love your podcast. Definitely been listening a lot. And my favorite, I think, is the Cutting Room Floor. I don't know if you know this fashion podcast.
I don't
so
know,
smart.
But I will check it out. Yeah,
you must. It's really excellent. Yeah, reading the Manor. I don't know if this is an account that you could follow on Instagram, Manor Africa. So reading their magazine, their latest magazine was on female artists, and I'm also reading Brazilian Arab business relations. I'm reading a book about that. So
That's a niche yet to be explored.
Exactly. That's what we're here for. Yes, yes, yes.
Super
New
fun.
possibilities. Yeah.
Last one is there a textile piece from home that holds a deep meaning? And I mean, of course, if spoken about Fouta, but anything else. It can be a personal piece as well. It doesn't have to be like a category.
I will say one in New York where I grew up, I have a knit wool blanket that my American grandmother made. She used to knit us sweaters, and we have this woolly blanket that we always bring out in the
Yeah.
wintertime. And I also love that there's a parallel with a wool blanket I have in Tunisia in my home in Shebba that my grandmother also knit. Very different blankets, but the same use of just to stay very warm in the winter. We have the woolen blankets in Tunisia on our beds in the wintertime, and nothing keeps me warmer. And even though my grandma passed a long time ago, every time we pull them out of the closet and we shake them out and get them ready to put back on the beds, it just brings her memory to the forefront. So I love both of those.
Yeah, it's so nice.
There's so many things we could go, but I am going to stick to the Fouta, which there are like, I think 3 that are so marking. One is the one we have from the 80s or 90s from my parents. And that was always that's still today the main like Fouta reference for us of like, we're going to get to this Fouta one day. It looks a lot like the Foutas like farmer women wear in Tunisia, like to cover their clothes when they're olive picking and things. So it's kind of in that style, and it has holes, and we fixed it, and but it's still so precious. And then the other one is a Fouta, and it was the first one I saw after years of only seeing industrial ones in Tunis. And it was one of the first purchases I made with like my first salary back in the day. And I was so happy to see that I could see the difference, what a handmade Fouta looked like, as opposed to all of these machine ones that we would see in stores all the time.
Yeah.
And it impressed me so much. I'm looking at it right now. It's traveled with me everywhere. And the third one is a Fouta from our very first collection. I think it's like also just reminds us like why we're doing what we're doing. But it's just such a special piece, and it's so useful. And yeah.
That culminates our very interesting episode. I think I learned so much how extraordinary, honestly, both your lives have been. I think it's just really interesting. Like, you guys have done so much, and I'm sure like there's lots and lots of many new successes on your way. So thank you for your time, both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Really
so much.
appreciate
it.
It was such a wonderful conversation. Thanks, Rini.